Troops. Every once in a while we get new ones added. Sometimes they suck and other times they're way too OP right out the gate and need some emergency nerfs. Balance changes are also a huge factor here. A troop can be terrible, nobody uses it, and then it suddenly gets a buff and it's way too OP. It's happened many times throughout the years. So today, I thought I'd talk about 8 of those times, troops or spells that at one point were incredibly broken. Yes, this is a follow-up to a previous video that I just did recently where I talked about these 8 troops. It'll be linked down below and also at the end of the video if you're interested in that. Anyways, with that being said, let's get right into it.
Let's do this.
Valkyrie. The Valkyrie was always the butt of the joke. It was one of the least used troops in the entire game for a long time. The general consensus was that for 8 housing space, you had a troop that could barely destroy a building by herself. And back then, she didn't target in between buildings, she just attacked one building at a time. There were just far better options than the Valkyrie. Over the years, she did receive some buffs, and in July 2014, she was reworked to now attack between buildings, making full use of her splash damage. Now, she was a pretty darn good troop, but not OP yet. That wasn't until March 2016 when they kinda went too far with the buff. Aside from a new level which was already OP out of the gates, every level now had increased damage, her initial attack was faster, and the only drawback was a slight decrease to her hit points. These changes were enough to kick off a new Valkyrie meta. All you had to do was create a simple funnel and in went the Valkyries, and man did they melt bases. With the help of a couple spells, just sit back and watch the Valkyries chop through multiple buildings in a couple seconds. It all happened very fast, they were way too powerful. And even with a nerf a couple days later, it was like they never even touched them. Made absolutely no difference. But in May 24th, 2016, spring traps out of all things would be their worst nightmare. You could now upgrade them, allowing you to fling 2 times the amount of Valkyries off your base than you could before. Now, by just upgrading your spring traps to level 2 and placing them in critical locations, which they probably already were in, your base could easily defend against mass Valkyries. Now, the meta didn't disappear overnight, but this was the beginning of the end for mass Valkyries, and eventually it caught up to them. Fast forward to today, after many changes in the game, they're pretty good, but certainly not the meta-shaking troop they once were. Santa Surprise. First available on November 19th, 2012, the Santa Surprise took 25 hours to train. God damn! The 2012 Santa Surprise was the first of its kind, and the game clearly wasn't ready for it. You'd basically drop a flare where you wanted the Santa to swoop in, and that he did, dropping explosive presents. Whoa. The problem was that it did 1500 damage, enough to destroy a clan castle 3 times. And if you happen to have 75 hours to train 3 of these spells, or $5 to gem it, you could destroy an entire town hall. The Santa Surprise was definitely a surprise, as it was way too powerful for 2012 and it could easily be abused, especially those who were trying to push for the leaderboards. Man. But the main problem was the clan castle, as all you had to do was train one of these, drop it on the clan castle, and it would never deploy troops. It was very bad for the game. Just 4 days later, on November 23rd, every clan castle at the time, there were only 4, received a buff, increasing their hit points by a lot. I mean, look at these numbers, man. It's like they pumped up these clan castles with steroids. Anyways, the spell wouldn't appear again until 2016 with way different stats. So yeah, that OP 2012 version of it only lasted 1 time, luckily. Graveyard Spell. The Graveyard Spell was released on December 12th, 2022, and just over a week later it was nerfed pretty heavily. But it seems that wasn't quite enough, and the spell was nerfed again almost a month later. So what exactly made this spell so OP that it had to be nerfed to the ground? Well, much like the bat spell that had issues with spawning too many bats, the Graveyard Spell had the exact same bouncing issue, spawning way too many skeletons. God, history really does repeat itself. The only difference with the Graveyard Spell is that it only deploys skeletons when troops are defeated, exactly 1 skeleton for every 3 housing space until there's no more skeletons to spawn. The issue with this is that it could easily be abused. With the correct army and 3 Graveyard graveyard spells, you could have a lot of skeletons spawning, essentially distracting the defenses while all the other troops were destroying the base. A very popular strategy was mass battle rams out of all things, because the key was to look for a troop that could yield that housing space fairly quickly, but also be very effective, and boy did it work. On December 21st, 2022, the graveyard spell was nerfed, reducing the skeleton spawn count at every level. Not only that, but the battle ram was also nerfed. But even after the nerf, you could still two-shot most districts by yourself, and a lot of players kept using it. It was like the nerf was a minor inconvenience. Unfortunately, it would be nerfed again on January 23rd, 2023, reducing the skeleton count once again. Fast forward to today, even though the strategy is not as popular and foolproof as it once was, the graveyard spell is still decently powerful. Lava Hound. The Lava Hound has always been a decent troop, and for the most part, it's remained pretty balanced. But if you've been playing for a while, you probably remember when the Lava Hound was completely broken in another area: defending. When the Lava Hound was released, it was able to attack any troop, including air troops. And this carried over to when it was defending as well. Dealing with a defending Lava Hound was, and still is, a pretty annoying thing, but especially back then because there was nothing you could really drop and take care of it easily. The Lava Hound was really good at defending itself, so you had to bring extra troops than you would have normally just to deal with the Lava Hound. It was a complete nightmare, and it also spawned too many lava pups, distracting your troops for far too long. Not only that, but in some strategies, a Lava Hound in the clan castle could have screwed up your entire attack. If, for example, dragons, which were very popular at the time, were to attack the Lava Hound and burst it open, the dragons would be distracted by the lava pups for a very long time, and it would ruin the entire attack. So yeah, a Lava Hound in your clan castle was good for the defender, but a nightmare for the attacker. However, in December 2014, the lava pups' hit points were nerfed, which made it somewhat easier to deal with, but it wouldn't be until September 2015 when it became way easier. Lava Hounds no longer attacked flying troops even when defending. You could now freeze any defending troops, and troops could now be lured from farther away. This update not only served as a defending Lava Hound nerf, but also made it easier to take care of clan castles in general. Super Wizard. Released on December 7th, 2020, the Super Wizard was a hit. Very strong out of the gate, and it didn't take long before the community paired it with the Battle Blimp to make the infamous Blizzard strategy. Blizzard refers to one part of some strategies, which was to fill a blimp with super wizards, then you deploy it, primarily to target the town hall and very strong defenses, and as soon as it bursts open, you drop some invisibility spells and intervals, and that was enough time for these super wizards to cause some really serious damage with their powerful chain attacks. Now, the problem was that it provided way too much value. You could take out 20% of the base by sending in that blimp and those spells. And it all happened really fast. Once that was over, you could continue to wipe the base clean, which was now weak enough to do so. But unfortunately for these super wizards, they received a massive nerf just over a month later. On January 20th, 2021, the Super Wizard's secondary chain damage was reduced from 60 to 40%. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but if you look at the numbers here, it's actually a very large amount. Almost 100 damage taken away from both levels at the time. With that being said, Blizzard is still very much alive and used widely. After the nerf, it was still viable and it didn't go anywhere, but it's certainly not as broken as it was when the Super Wizards were first introduced. Balloon. Balloons have always been a strong troop, especially when the Minions and Lava Hound came out. Lava Balloon really took off in those days, and it's always remained this one troop that is always reliable. But the balloon has gone through many changes. One of the most notable ones was a buff on December 19th, 2016, where they now attacked slightly sooner after reaching their target, meaning when the balloon reaches its destination, it would almost immediately drop its bomb. And boy, was that a mistake. The balloon went from powerful to very powerful overnight. Lava Balloon became a very easy method of 3-starring in war, so much that it felt like you could close your eyes and still 3-star. I wish I was exaggerating, but it really felt like that. It was crazy. The balloon just acted too fast for its powerful bombs. But sooner or later, every OP meta must meet its demise. In the Builder Hall update, it was announced that the balloon was getting a faster attack rate. Now that may sound like a buff, but it was actually a nerf. They would now drop more bombs, but each bomb did less damage. So now the balloon wouldn't go up to every building and immediately destroy it. It could take 2 or 3 bombs, which was way slower than it was before. The community was split on this change. On one hand, it made any strategy with balloons weaker, but on the other hand, some argued that the balloon was now balanced. In my opinion, I think no troop should have too much power, so maybe this nerf was necessary. Dragon. Once upon a time in 2012 and early 2013, when Town Hall 9 was the highest Town Hall, the Dragon was the most OP troop there was, specifically the Mass Dragon strategy. So much that leaderboard players at the time like Jorge Yao, the first person to reach 4,000 trophies, got there using Mass Dragons. And it was pretty easy to pick up. Simply train a lot of dragons and bring some lightning spells, take out some of those air defenses, and go to town. It was simply easy to use and very powerful. But over the years, something seems to have changed. The Mass Dragon strategy became weaker, took more skill to use and learn, and by 2016, people rarely ever recommended to use Mass Dragons, unless you were in the lower town halls. So what happened? Well, it's not really the dragons, it's the bases. In fact, the dragons have received numerous buffs since then. But the problem is that ever since those early days, bases have gotten much stronger. More defenses, new traps, the addition of heroes, and incredibly powerful clan castle troops. It was a little too difficult for the dragon to keep up, and over time it became harder and harder to use. And different strategies that were far more effective started to emerge, like Lava Loon and Go Wipe. It almost seemed like Mass Dragon was just this old thing that nobody does anymore. Fast forward to today, the only time I hear about Mass Dragons is for Town Hall 7 and 8. At those lower town halls, it never really went out of style, and it's probably one of the strongest troops you can use down there. Ice Golem. Okay, this last one is a fairly small one, but it's kind of interesting how it was nerfed. Released on December 10th, 2018, the Ice Golem, as you know, freezes the area around him as if you dropped a freeze spell. Pretty good for attacking. In fact, in offense, it got a buff, increasing the freeze radius. However, in the defensive side, it's a different story. Players noticed that an Ice Golem defending your village was incredibly OP and gave way too much value. I mean, it would freeze your troops for far too long, and it was messing up so many strategies. Players called it annoying, OP, and disruptive. And even though some players actually loved it and thought there's no way it needs a nerf, it's kind of hard to accept that a troop that's helping you so much needs a nerf. The reality was the Ice Golem was way too powerful and definitely needed a nerf. So on April 2nd, 2019, the freeze duration was reduced only on offense. This was pretty much the end of the short-lived strategy, and it would be nerfed again about a year later. This one's not as crazy as others on this list, but it's still an interesting part of Clash history, and I really wanted to mention this one. So guys, that is my list of 8 more of the most broken troops in Clash of Clans history. Obviously, I feel like there's way more we could talk about. The Electro Dragon and Night Witches have a pretty controversial history, but I decided I'm not going to talk about those and wrap up the series here. But feel free to comment down below some troops you think should have been mentioned, and hey, it might even be in my previous video, which I highly recommend. It should be on the left box here. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching. HaVoC out. Peace!